So I have been at Overstock for almost 12 years now. I was with the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee in Washington, D.C., came out to Overstock to tread water for a while before going to law school, and I've been there ever since. Okay, so Overstock was founded in 1999. If you know anything about the history of e-commerce, that was a bad time to start an e-commerce company. Most e-commerce companies, it's something like a mass extinction event. 97% of e-commerce companies went bankrupt between 1999 and 2002 at the death of the dot-com bubble. The beauty of being a company called Overstock.com during those years is we got to liquidate all of those dying dot-coms. We bought all of their inventory in a process called take-alls, where you don't even know what they have. You just agree to buy everything in the warehouse sight unseen, and then liquidated it all. We were founded on the idea that the problem with liquidations is that you have small lots of inventory widely distributed, sold into a widely distributed market. If you can take small lots of inventory and sell them into a single aggregated market, it's much more efficient. So that's what we did with Overstock, was aggregate all of that inventory together. We did that for about 5 or 6 years until we realized you can only grow so big before you run out of distressed inventory to liquidate, and it turned out for us that number was $700 million. And so we had to sort of reinvent the business on the fly from sort of 2006 to 2008 in order to start selling inline goods, in the process of which we created what was really the first retail marketplace. In fact, Amazon copied our program to create the Amazon marketplace. Also a funny story, not so funny. Tell you about that another time. We refocused the company really as, instead of being, most liquidation companies are jobbers. They're your classic wheelers and dealers, Joey Buttafuoco, bada bing, bada boom, let's make a deal. We refocused ourselves as a technology company because we realized to survive in e-commerce in the face of Amazon, you couldn't just be a lemonade stand with a website. You had to have something better than what was available to the rest of the market. And so as we made that evolution to become a technology company, we were able to build a lot of e-commerce technology from the ground up. It was featured in Wired magazine. We've won Best of the Web Performance winners. We've had the Web Marketing Association's Best Mobile Shopping App on iOS and Android 5 years in a row. We also launched our first ever mobile shopping site in 2005. That's 2 years before there was an iPhone. And so you had to navigate it with a number menu. It was a little ahead of its time. But the internet catches up. So we also are known for customer service. The National Retail Federation does a survey where they call 1,000 people and ask them the open-ended question, what is the retailer that gives you the best customer service? It doesn't make any distinction online, offline, anything like that. We were in the top 4 in that survey, in spite of being less than $2 billion in revenue the last 5 years that they did it, which was a really huge distinction. So, on to the subject of the discussion, innovation, which is why it's a little weird that I have a philosopher at the front of the deck. Thomas Sowell is a philosopher. He writes about 2 principal subjects. One is, he says that all decisions have to be made at the knowledge frontier. And so what the knowledge frontier is depends on whether knowledge is easily centralized or not easily centralized. And he speaks a lot in terms of political philosophy, that that's the difference between right and left. What we would think of in America as conservatives think knowledge is difficult to centralize, so you push things out into markets and outsource decision-making to consumers. The left tends to think things are easy to centralize, so pull decision-making into central decision-making authorities. The answer of whether it's easy to centralize or not easier to centralize is not a universal answer. But the thing that Thomas Sowell bases his philosophy around is decisions have to be made as close to that knowledge frontier as possible, because the further away they get, the worse the decisions are made. Now, the reason that matters
in this context of this discussion, particularly coming from a technology company, is that there is a universal principle in technology, and particularly in machine learning, which is where I've spent a lot of my career working, that algorithms don't matter, data matters. It is not how good a decision maker you have running your company. It is not how good a decisioning algorithm you have running your website. It is how good a data you feed into that decision maker and into that algorithm that determines how good the outputs are. And the people with the best data always win. The best example of that, Google is eating the world right now in all sorts of different disciplines, particularly related to everything to do with image recognition. You know, the Google self-driving car, the social media identification of pages, all of this space around image search and the use of images in order to give better feedback in search results. Nobody can catch up on that, and there's one principal reason. Everybody with an Android phone or everybody who has Google Photos installed on their phone for free storage signs in their consent to opening those products that Google can use those images for training algorithms, which means that Google has more photos to train images in machine learning off of than anybody else in the world. They don't need the best algorithms, they have the best data, and so they can beat Facebook in the discipline, they can crush Yahoo, they can crush Microsoft, because they don't have good data to train off of. Data lives at the knowledge frontier, and you have to get the decision making to the knowledge frontier where that data is. Great example of this from my work at Overstock. How many of you have heard of Newegg? They are, bar none, the best seller of computers on the internet. You know, they have lived right in the headlights in one of Amazon's core customers for the entirety of their existence, and they've grown and made money in a category where everybody goes bankrupt. And for the life of us, we could not figure why we can outprice everybody on everything, why we could not outprice Newegg on computers. And we dug in, and in one of my previous lives, my job was in competitive intelligence. We finally made a breakthrough when I called Newegg about a computer that I bought from them because it was more expensive on Overstock, and discovered, because my computer had a problem, I wanted to do a return, the computer wouldn't boot up. Their customer service agent, without ever handing anything off, the same guy who answered the phone, said, "Oh, let me walk you through a reinstallation of Windows." And I was like, wait a minute, the customer service agent knows how to reinstall Windows? Without missing a beat, he took me through a reboot on Windows, reinstalled the operating system, the computer worked fine. He prevented the return of a $1,000 laptop, which once it's been returned and opened, has to be treated as factory refurbished. Even after it's fixed, it can never again be sold as new, gets marked down 60% all out of the retailer's pocket. So in the space of a 20-minute call with me reinstalling Windows, he saved his company something like $600. That's why they can sell computers for less than Overstock.com is. Their call center is full of help desk agents. And so they don't take a return, they fix the problem on the spot over the phone. And they don't have some IVR that's guiding their customer service agent through a welcome menu and a script. And no, they actually have competent people who understand the computers, are capable of making a decision, understand the economics, and are empowered to make the decision on the spot of what to do. The decision making is at the knowledge frontier. It's not with the vice president of customer service. That's what decision making at the knowledge frontier is. Now to do that, that meant they had to have customer service agents who were at the knowledge frontier. Our customer service agents couldn't do that, and that's why we couldn't replicate that. So I'm going to break this into sort of two halves, both work through that same lens of philosophy. How do you get decision-making to the knowledge frontier? The first is on sort of the government policy and public side of how regulation impacts business and innovation. In order for regulations to be effective and have a minimal impact on innovation, they have to be narrowly tailored and they have to be ends focused. Now, what does that mean? One of the things that Sowell says is that our distinctions in terms of philosophy about whether knowledge is easily centralized or not easily centralized tend to revolve around whether we think about people's intentions or think about people's results. People who are concerned with intention say, well, I don't know if I can trust the intention of the decision maker out there to be aligned with mine, and I know my intention, so I want to centralize the decision making back to myself. In many regulations, we concern ourselves with the intentions of the regulated rather than with the result that we want to get out of the regulated. The Americans with Disabilities Act is a great example. This is an act that says, and rightfully so, people with disabilities should not be isolated in public life. If you're in a wheelchair, you should be able to get inside of public buildings. If you have a learning disability, you should have access to a public education the same as everybody else that's actually catered to you and the way you learn. And it dealt with all aspects of disability, but in that regulation, in that act, it is possibly the single most expensive piece of legislation to the United States economy ever passed by Congress. The reason is it laid out specific policy prescriptions to everything in it. Things as detailed as there must be a ramp carved into every sidewalk at a distance of every X feet. If your city doesn't have their blocks subscribed to every X feet, you might have ramps in places that make no sense at all because you had to have a ramp in the sidewalk running out into the middle of traffic. And there is no leniency, there is no exception, there is no room for judgment. The law legislates how many feet there can be between two ramps. If that ramp happens to run right into a sewer drain, too bad, you have to reroute your city's sewer system in order to put the ramp there because that's where the ramp has to be under the law. There is no flexibility. It was means-oriented. It wasn't ends-oriented. It didn't have any flexibility around what's the least restrictive way to give handicapped people access to the sidewalk. And because it was focused on the mean and not on the end, it was incredibly disruptive and expensive to business. So, what's the opposite of this in terms of an example of a regulation? Energy Star labeling. We want appliances to be more efficient. There's this dirty secret in terms of energy efficiency. People, when you're in elementary school and you want to be environmentally friendly, they tell you, turn the lights off. Manage your electricity usage by unplugging your chargers when they're not in use. All of that's trivial. That is like a fraction of a percent of energy, and it doesn't matter. There's two things in your house that matter: your air conditioning and your appliances. That's it. Everything else is irrelevant. It's all a rounding error. An energy-efficient air conditioner, an energy-efficient refrigerator, that makes all the difference in the world. And so by requiring people to label how much it costs to run your air conditioner for an hour and how much it costs to run your refrigerator for a year, you're able to look and see, oh yeah, that $200 refrigerator is actually going to cost me $1,000 over 5 years, whereas the $500 refrigerator will cost me the same amount. And so you can make the judgments very quickly and easily to realize that the cheapest refrigerator is not, in fact, the cheapest refrigerator. And those appliances went out the door and people started buying more efficient appliances. We solved energy efficiency in appliances and we never had to mandate anything. All we said is you got to tell people how much it's going to cost them to use your refrigerator. And that's a simple fact labeling-based decision. And so it was extremely effective. And it did so because it was focused on the end and was very narrowly tailored in its prescription. Now, another real danger in regulation that makes it very expensive for the economy at large is when you pick winners and losers in the economy. You hear about this a lot. It's called crony capitalism. And I think this is the place where the right and left should really come together in where we can all agree on regulation. If there's one thing worse than governments dictating decisions, it's governments dictating decisions and then giving all the profits to a corporation privately. And that's where we can all agree. This is what's referred to as the government's economic development fund. And the governor would hate to hear me say this, but when you have a slush fund that's designated for politicians to hand out to companies to attract them to the state, all that is giving politicians the ability to go on campaigns and say, look at these jobs I brought to the state. Most of the jobs under economic development funds and under corporate head accounting on behalf of states and cities go there anyway. Adobe didn't come to Utah because we gave them a tax break. Adobe came to Utah because it's really cheap to hire developers and accountants here. That's the same reason Oracle and Salesforce and all of Adobe's competitors came too without the economic benefit from the governor. And so by picking winners and losers, the problem is, yeah, you help a company out, maybe you attract a marginal job, but who did you isolate to get there in the first place? Because now somebody is paying more taxes, particularly startups, small businesses that don't make flashy headlines for a politician, are now paying more than their entrenched competitors. The real reason Adobe came to Utah in the first place is because a little startup called Omniture kicked their butt in online analytics, and they bought it, and when they bought it, they discovered it was much cheaper to employ people in Utah than it was in San Francisco. So they laid off 700 people in San Francisco and moved all those Adobe jobs to Utah. The startups is what drove the economy, not the established companies. And so we have to be really careful as we make public policy to not pick winners and losers, and rather just lay out the state's objectives and then let people compete to fulfill them, because they will fulfill our objectives, even as public interest objectives, much more effectively when they compete and do it on their own rather than when it's dictated to them. Another great example of this is the SEC and the brokerages. You can think about this in a number of different fields. In fact, I can show some of them. Who knows what the American Medical Association or the American Bar Association are? Who's heard of those? Now, the name American Medical Association or American Bar Association makes it sound like they're a group that protects the medical practice of America. They make America healthy. It's a trade union. They're a union to protect doctors and raise their salaries. How do they do that? By making it very, very expensive to become a doctor, so it's expensive for new doctors to come into the market. Why does a doctor need 2 years of liberal arts education before they go to medical school? We have an exam that says if they understand the sciences well enough to go to medical school, but we make them go from 9 years of education to 11 years of medical education so they can take an art history class. And the cost that adds to the medical system in the United States is astounding. Another case of this is taxicab medallions. Taxicab medallions came into existence, and most of you may have never even seen one of these because now we have Uber and Lyft that disrupted the taxicab industry. But it came from the fact that the cities said, in order to run a cab in our city, we need to prove that you're licensed. We're only going to license X thousand people to operate cabs because that's all we have the time to review. And so you have to buy a medallion for us to review you, prove that your car and your driver are authorized, and then you can operate a cab in our city. You could rent those licenses, you could do a lot of different things, but there was a finite number of licenses. And that inflates the cost of cabs because you can't let supply rise to meet demand. It's artificially capped by those medallions. Well, in some countries like Greece, for example, you all heard about Greece's economic problems over recent years. Basically, the whole country's going bankrupt. Greece has medallions to operate trucks. You can't run freight without a medallion to say, I've been licensed and inspected and I'm allowed to operate a truck, and there's only so many licenses allowed. Well, 1% of the entire economy of Greece gets siphoned off the top by those truck drivers with those medallions because they now own a rent, a government-operated monopoly that says you can't move freight without them, and there's not enough trucks to go around. And so 1% of the entire economy of Greece goes out the window to that regulation because the government has picked those few truckers as the winners, and everybody else in the economy are losers. It's the same thing with the Bar Association and lawyers. Why do I need 2 years of liberal arts education to go past the bar and become a lawyer? The answer is because that makes lawyer salaries bigger and prevents supply from meeting demand. So you have a trade union that works within the government to stop that from ever happening. Now, another key to regulation being efficient and fostering innovation is that it needs to be predictable and it needs to be simple. In our case as Overstock.com, we deal with an issue around internet sales tax. Now, the Supreme Court said in 1992, the state can't make a company from outside of its borders act as its agent to collect taxes unless the company is in that state. It's called interstate commerce. You can't regulate commerce from other states because otherwise California could tax Florida from growing oranges to corner the orange market, and it would all be a disaster. That was one of the basic agreements of the Constitution. In the case of sales tax, it doesn't say you can't charge your citizens tax on the purchases they make from out of state. It says you have to collect that yourself. You can't expect somebody else's company to collect that. Well, that was from back in the days of cataloging when people ordered from the Sears and JCPenney catalog. Now there's this huge industry around e-commerce where people buy things on the internet. Those companies are not in every state, and so those states that don't have e-commerce companies can't collect those taxes unless they get their citizens to report it. Now, very likely all of you have bought something online, and very likely none of you has ever filed that on your state tax return to say, I bought this online and here's my use tax for the sales tax you didn't collect. And because you didn't say that, the states are looking for a way to collect it. And so they come back to us and try and force us, whether we're here or not, to collect those taxes for them. This has been in litigation for literally 14 years of active litigation of states defying the court order, saying you can't do it, passing laws to do it, filing lawsuits against us, letting it work their way through the courts. The Supreme Court just heard a case yesterday. The problem is we have a much harder time than bricks and mortars do in doing this. And the reason is when you go to Walmart, you don't pay taxes on the sales tax based on where you live. You pay it based on where Walmart is. They calculate the exact same percentage every time they ring something up from that cash register. It's easy. That Walmart store, it's always the same tax code. And nothing ever changes. For us, if we have to calculate those taxes based on where the customer lives, do you know how many taxing jurisdictions there are in the United States that charge sales taxes? Because it's 18,500. And we have to be able to map who you are, where you live, and what are the taxing changes in that jurisdiction, in any one of those 18,500 jurisdictions, which becomes an infinitely complex problem. One of those jurisdictions on any given day is always changing their tax code, and we're expected to comply with it and are financially liable for complying with it. And so that's where predictability and simplicity come in. If the federal government wants to pass a universal standard that says you name one jurisdiction in any state and they can force you to collect sales taxes, great. That's one thing, we can comply with it. It's easy to calculate. That's not a problem. Expecting us to comply with 18,500 different tax laws, that's complicated and that's a huge burden of compliance. And that burden of compliance and understanding is what stifles innovation. And other places with insurance companies, you hear a lot of discussion about why is insurance so expensive? Now, part of the problem is the federal government doesn't regulate insurance. And if you listen to me talk, you'd be saying, well, why would the federal government not regulating something make it more expensive? That seems like it's the opposite problem. Well, it's because the states do all regulate insurance, and they all regulate it differently, which means insurance agencies are either state insurance agencies, you operate in a single state, and that's all you know, and that's all you comply with, or you're a mega corporation that's done the research to be able to operate in every state in the country. But you can't sell insurance across state lines in any state, which means you can't get out-of-state competitors to drive down insurance costs. And so the normal competitive dynamic that would make things cheap doesn't work in insurance, which is why insurance premiums are far higher than they should be based on the cost of administering the market, and why insurance is such a profitable industry to be in. If you want to see industries that have some sort of lock that prevents competition from operating the way it's supposed to, just look at anything that Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway are invested in. There is something blocking proper competition in that industry. Which brings me to my next point, banking. Same problem. States regulate retail banking laws. The SEC regulates federal banking laws. The states create problem with interstate banking competition. The SEC creates problems where it's impossible for new entrants to get licensed and authorized to compete at the federal and sort of prime banking levels. Now, part of this breaks into two types of regulation. There are regulations created where executive agencies are given a directive. Think of this like the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act just says, we're going to have clean air and the EPA is going to make regulations to make our air clean. Well, what does that mean? What is clean? How clean is clean? And the answer is, it's whatever the EPA says it is, and the EPA leadership changes over every 4 years when we get a new president. And so when we go back to predictability and simplicity, we don't have any predictability or simplicity about what the standard of clean air is, because it keeps changing every time we get a new president. So it makes it very difficult to plan and very difficult to build that compliance into what we do. If you have a harsh standard legislated by Congress, harsher than what the EPA sets forward today, but it's written in law, that's much easier and cheaper to plan to, and you can come up with innovative and creative ways to achieve that objective versus having a constantly moving target that's going up and down over time. The opposite of this, a positive example, would be the gas tax. I have literally never heard anybody in business complain about the gas tax, but every business pays for it. 100% of businesses pay something out to the gas tax, whether it's your employees having a higher cost of getting to work, whether it's your merchandise having a higher cost of moving across the country, because it's completely even. There are no winners and losers in the gas tax, and it's completely predictable. We know what it is, we know what it's going to be tomorrow, and we know what it's going to be the next day. It's a totally level playing field. Now, the gas tax cleans the air. It makes it more expensive to operate trucks, makes us all want more efficient trucking fleets, makes us all want more fuel-efficient vehicles. It achieves the objective of clean air, but no business has ever complained about it, and it's because it meets all of those standards. It's predictable, it's legislated in the law, and we all know what we're getting and have an even playing field. Now, patents. How many of you have ever heard of a patent troll? So patent trolling, first I should start with the base of patents. I think patents are a great thing. There are lots of people in technology. You get these hipster Bay Area guys who say nothing should ever be patented. Your idea is only yours if you've executed on it better than everyone else. I disagree. There are good reasons to have a patent. There are things that need protected. Not the least of which because you need capital when you have a great idea, and you can't get capital if the guy who's going to give you the money to build your business can say, oh, I've already got money and now I've got your idea, now I'm going to build it instead. And so the ability to protect your idea really does liberate you to go execute on your idea. Patent trolling are people who don't execute on ideas. They go find very broad, very old patents that are about to expire. They buy them and then they sue the whole world on misconstrued basis, trying to stretch vague language in that patent to say it covers everyday things that exist in all businesses. Take an example. Overstock got sued by a patent troll that claimed they invented JavaScript. They said their patent covered JavaScript. It has this vague description of how you have a client's code executing against a remote server, and it's going to perform an application inside of a browser window. The problem with it is the patent was filed in 1999. JavaScript existed on the internet since at least 1994. It was in AOL, the AOL before there was even a World Wide Web. And so, it was clearly fatally flawed. Any technologist that looked at that patent and looked at what they were suing people for could have immediately said this was patently false. The problem is the patent trolls don't look for somebody who understands what they're talking about. They file 100% of their cases in a federal court jurisdiction called the Eastern District of Texas. Now, what is the Eastern District of Texas? It is two small towns of 30,000 people on the border of Texas and Louisiana. Less than 10% of the population of that district has a high school diploma. And these people try 75% of all technology patent cases in the United States, all under one judge who used to be a plaintiff attorney on behalf of patent trolls. He is the federal judge that handles all of those cases. There is no summary judgment. There is no professional oversight. All of it goes directly to the jury who doesn't understand anything about technology, who are then expected to decide, was JavaScript invented in 1994? Is JavaScript what's described in this patent? And they make those judgments, and billions of dollars of verdicts get handed down. Now, it's absolutely terrifying for most companies. Google got sued on that patent, and they said, you know what? It's not worth it to go to the Eastern District of Texas and talk about this. Here's $10 million to go away and never talk to us again. Overstock went to the Eastern District of Texas. We fought that trial for 5 years. We initially had a jury of our peers who came out and said, that might be violating the patent, and handed a $300,000 judgment against us. Not that bad in the scope of things, better than the $10 million Google paid to make it go away. 3 weeks later, the patent office issued a ruling saying, oh yeah, this patent is totally invalid. This is definitely prior art. This is definitely not a legitimate patent. Before they did it, over 100 technology companies settled with that patent troll and gave them over $100 million. And that is the basis of what happens in this industry. And that is the corruption that happens in the patent industry and why it needs reformed. Somebody made $100 million off of a bogus patent that the US Patent Office recognized was invalid. So how do you fix that? Well, the first one is you can't let trials happen. The Constitution mandates we get a jury of our peers. Some people ask, why are patents even heard in front of a jury at all? There is an argument for that. But who's a jury of our peers to technology companies? Is it the Eastern District of Texas? When Google and Samsung and Apple sue each other, they don't sue each other in the Eastern District of Texas. They sue each other in Palo Alto. Apple won the biggest patent verdict ever against Samsung. 9 of the 12 jurors were engineers. That was a fair case. That's how the legal system is supposed to work. And so getting the jurisdiction set with a true jury of our peers, that goes a long way towards solving the problem, not letting people jurisdiction shop. The next way to improve the patent system is to make sure that patents and their cases and the way they're tried are based around quick decisions in fact. There was a fact. Did JavaScript exist before 1999? The answer is yes. That's an easy solution. And so getting the questions of fact established by the court and requiring that to be done first, that goes a long way towards solving the problems and restoring the patents back to being enabling of innovation in business rather than stifling. Because for every Overstock that could afford to fight that patent troll, there were a dozen startups that just went out of business because all of their capital got taken by patent trolls. Now, that's the public policy side of innovation. The corporate side of innovation actually works along the same lines. There's a book called The Innovator's Dilemma, maybe the best business book ever written. No offense to everybody else in the room who may have written business books. Basically, the subject matter of it is, why does innovation die in big companies? The answer is the CFO tries to squeeze profit out of it and in the process squeezes innovation out. The CFO is the enemy of innovation. How do you fix that? By moving knowledge out to the knowledge frontier. The CFO isn't the enemy of innovation because he hates innovation. He's the enemy of innovation because if he's making decisions about how the business operates, he is really far away from the knowledge frontier. And the cost of centralizing all information to the CFO is enormous. And so the first and foremost policy, if you want to break the innovator's dilemma and push decisions to the knowledge frontier, it's don't make the CFO the emperor of your business. Move the decision-making out to the knowledge frontier. The second is innovation comes through trial and error. Nobody has a great success rate when it comes to trying new ideas. Now, most of those trials are in fact errors. The way you prevent that from being overly costly and preserve the CFO's sanity is you have to have a very vigorous analytical and testing culture. That makes your experimentation a ratchet, so you only move forwards, you never move backwards. Overstock cannot roll anything to its website. The president of Overstock.com can't roll a change to the website without it going through a controlled experiment where some customers see the new version, some customers see the old version, and we actually see whether it encourages good shopping behavior or not. That's the level of discipline required in order to encourage innovation because it takes all the risk out of it. There's two approaches in technology to developing technology. There's Waterfall, and Waterfall, you can think of it as being like Microsoft or like old console games, where you spend years preparing a product, you code it all up, you have a big bang release and you sell it to the market, and then you move on to building the next product, and it is what it is. That's compared to agile development. Think of this like Google Spreadsheets. You've never downloaded a new version of Google Spreadsheets because versions don't exist on Google Spreadsheets. When Google makes an update to Google Docs, it rolls and you never know the difference. Whereas when you download a new version of Word, you have Word 16 or you have Word 07 or you have Word 95, but you never have the true current version of the best of what Microsoft's developers have created. And that's the difference between agile and waterfall. And the more agile you get, the more experiments you run, the more chances you have to find successes and identify your failures and discharge them. Now, when it comes to experimentation, Joseph Stalin had it right. Quantity is its own form of quality. The more experiments you run, the more likely you are to find winners. We used to have a policy where product managers ran their roadmaps through executives. We all reviewed them and voted, these are the ones I'd like to do, these are the ones I'd like to do. Executives would go in horse trade, okay, I'll agree to vote for this one if you agree to vote for this one for me. And we'd all allocate our development time to build our software products. We tested very few things. They were lots of big bang projects with 6 months, nothing to see, rolls out to the audience, and then we see if it's going to work or not. We changed that a couple years ago. We made it so that the development teams control their own destiny. They decide what projects they're going to work on. It meant they did a lot less big bang projects, a lot less long haul projects, ran a lot more small experiments. The number of winning projects coming to the website doubled. Getting executives out of the way, moving the decision back to the knowledge frontier, and testing constantly. Every team in the company has to roll code and test it at least once every 2 weeks now. There are no 6-month projects. That produced a doubling of the efficiency of our technology resources. The last one I would say, and this is a great management lesson, great managers, and this is my other shameless plug for one other business book I care about. I don't read a lot of them, but one other shameless plug. This isn't just about technology. Toyota did the same thing I'm talking about on a car manufacturing plant. These are guys using wrenches. You don't identify the problems you don't identify solutions to your team, and you don't dictate solutions to your team. You identify problems for your team. Use the data to find what's wrong in the customer experience as it stands today, and then let them innovate the solutions. It's the same as not dictating means in your regulation. Dictate the end. We want clean air. Find the best way to do it. A great example of this. I used to run our search engine. I was the product manager over our search engine. We had a problem where I could see in the data that on very long queries over 12 words, we significantly underperformed. Why that was, why on small queries, middle-length queries, we were great, but then on really long queries, we went downhill, I couldn't tell. But I realized, looking through the data, that a lot of them were actual product name searches from other retailers. So I went to my development team and I told them, find a way to map competitors' product names to our products and do redirects on those searches. That was a bad order. I dictated the solution, didn't identify the problem. We had a horrible product, it didn't work, the test failed, it was my fault. When I actually showed them what it was and why I was so disappointed that my solution didn't work, I showed them this example of an end table on eBay. The engineer looked at it and I said, I know we have this same coffee table. I can't figure out why we can't show customers who come to our site and search for this eBay coffee table that we've got it and we've got it for less. He said, oh, the problem is that we're doing a redirect. There are only a couple words in there that matter and they'll identify the product. So in the name Coaster 2002 Brianna 2-drawer nightstand with tray black, there are only a couple of words that matter. So he built a script that strips out everything that isn't an actual descriptor or attribute of a table, and it's left with nightstand, tray. The first result that comes back for nightstand with a tray happens to be the same nightstand, because those are the only words in that whole string that mattered. The rest was all stuff made up by the eBay seller because they were reselling our nightstand at a higher price on eBay. And sure enough, we had it for less, and we undercut them on price, and it was a huge success. Not because I had the right idea, but because I finally woke up and shared the problem with them instead of the solution, and they, at the knowledge frontier, who actually understood how the search engine worked, could fix the search engine. So those would be my great lessons. Decisions at the knowledge frontier, and understand how difficult is it to centralize information. People studying in this class and people who voluntarily go to lectures they don't have to are bound for management. But when you are in management, understand the best management understands that it is not the source of innovation. Innovation comes from outsourcing decisioning, not insourcing decisioning. So with that, thank you, and I would love to hear questions if we have a few minutes.
So my name is Brian Isom. I'm an econ master student up here at Utah State. And I'm curious, as a tech company, what in your opinion is the single most wasteful policy that Overstock has to deal with from a regulatory standpoint?
That's a really good question. I would say the biggest burden on Overstock comes from the idea that states can regulate internet companies that have no nexus to them. Normally, I'm a states' rights guy. If the states can do it, let the states do it, and don't let the feds do it. When you have a business that doesn't exist in your state, you are not the knowledge frontier for that business and the way it interacts best. And far too often, states attempt to overreach outside and regulate the internet at large. rather than regulating the specific problems that they may have locally in their state. That creates a big regulatory burden. I would say the close second to that is probably the patent industry. I faced opposing counsel. Deposition is when the opposing counsel gets to come in and interview you, ask you questions under oath. I faced opposing counsel in depositions 18 times in 12 months from patent trolls in the space of a single year, all in cases under a single federal judge in the Eastern District of Texas. If we were a startup instead of a big company that has resources, that would have bankrupted us. There is no way we could have survived had that been 10 years earlier in our history. And so, yeah, I think there's a huge overhead cost to that.
Thank you for everything you shared. My name is Hayden Hubbard. I'm a freshman in economics and biological engineering. I just had a quick question about your personal path towards where you are now and how you got involved with this company.
Great. That's actually a really funny story. My personal path was that I was working in the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee. I had a fiance who was doing graduate work in Utah. We were going to get married, and I knew I was going to have to move to Utah because of it. The CEO of Overstock.com was lobbying our committee over naked short selling. Different securities issue, also very important. He had just walked out of the office, and my boss walked by and said, "Hey, what do you want to bet I could get that guy to hire you without meeting you?" So that's how it started. It was on a dare. It worked. He did hire me without meeting me. I had no idea what I did. And so when I showed up on my first day of work, he asked, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I was doing econometrics around asbestos litigation reform." And he says, "Oh, we have this new thing called web analytics. Come figure out how to implement Omniture." And so I sat down with an Omniture consultant, and that's how I started Overstock. I learned web analytics. From web analytics, I learned by seeing the data. Again, data is the lifeblood of business. I was able to see product management and tech development, what worked and what didn't. So I moved over to that side of the business, and I followed that path. First learn the data, then learn the business through pricing, through merchandising, through marketing, all over the business until I was in my current role.
So my name's Isaac Ray, doing economics and finance here. My question is similar to that one, I guess. Being in such a dynamic role where you've got like political science, law, econ, finance, tech, you got all of that. If you were back in our shoes here studying, what would you do differently to prepare for that?
I would say whatever you do, if you have any interest in management, take quantitative courses. I spent probably half of my career at Overstock in the marketing department. The days of Mad Men marketing are dead. It doesn't exist anymore. And the companies who do still have that kind of marketing are all dying. They're going to be gone by the time you guys are midway through your career. If you have interest in marketing, in pricing, in merchandise, take quantitative courses and learn data. Those skills, even if it's just the basics, are absolutely vital, and they will get you so far ahead regardless of what you want to do in your career. The best merchant at Overstock was a guy who wrote SQL extracting data from databases and learned how to do that and manage millions of products through SQL queries instead of doing that same logic through manual processes. He could negotiate prices on products through SQL. It is so powerful, regardless of what course you want to take, to have a good quantitative foundation.
Thank you. My name is McLean Marshall. I'm a sophomore doing economics and MIS, Management Information Systems. Just curious, we're here talking about innovation. What are some of the innovations that you see in the next 5 to 10 years that will change e-commerce and Overstock, really?
Yeah, the biggest one that's kind of an ongoing transformation right now is machine learning. Basically, any decision that you make where you look at a report and then you make a business decision, you're an unnecessary step in the middle. The machines can apply that logic too. And so machine learning will increasingly run businesses independently. The key is figuring out what data to introduce to the machines that provides the intelligence. And so automation and machine learning are going to upend most of the business market. And really over the next 20 years, that's the direction the economy is going to move. In the old world, Walmart became famous and became what Walmart is through a system they called the merchant princes. You flag off a section of every store in Walmart that is the sporting goods section, and you build a team of all the guys with the best domain knowledge around sporting goods, and they are going to optimize that shelf space to get the maximum amount of revenue out of the sporting goods shelves. And they are going to know the market inside and out. They're going to know every customer that's in it. They're going to know how all the cohorts and demographics and everything split up. And they're going to be the prince of everything, the pricing, the display, the marketing of sporting goods. And that was a great model in the 70s. The problem is now there's data on all of that, and a machine can do all of it better than they can, faster and cheaper. And so learning what to feed into the machine is more valuable than learning the sporting goods in terms of your ability to move ahead in the business. And that, I think, machine learning is really going to become the core of the economy moving forward.
My name is Jesse. I'm a master's student in the economics program here. I'm just curious, what do you think is the best way to get promoted in the business you're working in?
Great. So 2 things I would say. One is, like I said earlier, master the data, know the data of the business, because the person with the best data makes the best decisions, and that's the best way to move forward in your career. The second one I would say on the interpersonal level, and I'm normally not a big interpersonal guy, I'm kind of a robot myself, but it is this: learn word economy. If there is one thing I could change in the US education system that would make the US economy more efficient, it would be to make speech and debate mandatory for everybody starting in middle school. Because ultimately, our relationships with executives, you hear a lot about networking and FaceTime, and there's all these theories and influencing people and winning friends, and ultimately, you influence people and win friends because you're effective, but you also have to be known to be effective. Well, you don't need more FaceTime with executives if you know how to say in 2 sentences what takes other people 20 sentences to say. I was a debater. I coached the BYU debate team for 5 years. I debated through high school and college, was the captain of the team there when I was in college. That is the most valuable thing that was ever done for me in my career, because I know how to reduce a 20-sentence argument down to 2 sentences. And so it means, as an entry-level analyst, the CEO would stop by and be like, "Oh, you're the Senate Judiciary guy. Hey, what are you working on?" And I could tell him in 2 sentences what I was doing and why it mattered to him. And that built a relationship. I never got more than 2 sentences with him. He's a very impatient guy. But because I could communicate in 2 sentences something that mattered to him, he started to appreciate talking to me and talk to me more. And that's been true with every boss I've ever had. If you learn how to make a good statement in 2 sentences of what you're doing and why it matters to them, you will get ahead and people will understand the value you're adding. Now, you still have to add value, but your ability to express that clearly and concisely is immensely valuable. And I'll give you one third one. If there's a third business book that I love, it's Machiavelli's The Prince. People think you're a sociopath if they actually read it. You have to take out the context about murdering rivals' families and things. But if you think about it in a business context and just think, okay, how do I interpret this from statecraft in the 1400s to business today? That is the best book on leadership in existence. Thank you.